Welcome, everybody. My name is Dave Goren, Executive Director of the National Sports Media Association. I want to thank Greater Winston-Salem, Inc., which sponsors our Paying It Forward, Paying It Back series. And we are thrilled to be joined today by Ken Burns, a legendary documentary filmmaker whose upcoming film, Muhammad Ali, is premiering on PBS September 19th. But we're all lucky because we get the link to see it ahead of time. I've already watched it. I don't know how many others have, but as usual, Ken, a fantastic job. Why Muhammad Ali?
Well, first of all, thank you for that nice mini review. This is a film also co-directed by Sarah Burns, my daughter, and David McMahon, my son-in-law. They also wrote the script, so everything that you like is theirs. Everything you don't like is probably my fault. We've been drawn to him for years and years and years. He is one of the most compelling figures in all of American history. It's an epic hero's journey. He's a mythic figure that therefore provides us with lots of, I don't want to say lessons, but he provides us with opportunities to understand ourselves better. That's what mythic creatures are about. Achilles has his great strengths, but he also has his weaknesses, his heel and his hubris. And so we understand that, and we were interested in the complete picture. There are lots of really, as you all know, really good documentaries on Muhammad Ali, focusing on a couple of years, focusing on a particular fight. It was our attempt to do a complete soup to nuts in our 4-part, 8-hour series that, as you said, will start on September 19th. And to try to understand who this person was, born in Jim Crow America in Louisville, Kentucky, and dying after decades of suffering, imprisoned by Parkinson, but dying the most beloved person on the planet, which is not such a terrible aspiration for any of us to have. And he's clearly, as many of you have recognized in your own writing, the athlete of the previous century. His life seems to have encompassed almost all of the issues of the second half of the 20th century, all the intersections. And yet he's also speaking to us in this moment right now, as if somehow we'd planned to do this documentary to come out in the middle of Me Too or Black Lives Matter, all of which are sort of post when we said yes to this and kept our nose to the grindstone. It's really hard to distill even this remarkable life into the 8 hours that we did. And I'm talking to you from New Hampshire, where we make maple syrup, and it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup, and that's exactly what it is. We have had to spend those years collecting literally hundreds and hundreds of hours to get the 8 that we are presenting in September on PBS. It's a fascinating story, and this intersection of sports, as we all know, one of the most important subjects that has for a long time not been taken seriously, and fortunately in the last 40 or 50 years has been taken seriously, about politics, about race, about religion, and particularly Islam, about Me Too, aspects of the Me Too movement. His treatment of women for most of his life is abhorrent. And his treatment of his rivals is embarrassing to him and to us, using the language of the Jim Crow America to belittle, most of his rivals, particularly his greatest rival, Joe Frazier. So there's a lot to pack in and understand, and it's important not to, particularly in our media age and computer culture where everything's a 1 and a 0, not to just sort of flip the switch off. He reminds us of the complexity of us, both the U.S. and of us in an intimate way, and it's why we've drawn so close to him and feel such a powerful connection to his arc. I can't imagine why we haven't done it before, other than we probably just didn't have the chops to try to attempt it.
I would imagine there are so many subjects out there that fascinate you. I went back and rewatched the 60 Minutes feature that was done last year the other day. And and you alluded to it, making a film, you said, is subtractive.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the amount of research, and I watch the non-mastered copy, so I see every code for every still photo and all the watermarks from all the archival moving footage. How many people does it take to come up with all that?
Well, it's interesting. That's a really great question. And it's still pretty small outfit. People said, boy, you must have legions of researchers. And we don't. It's a handful of stuff. One of the 4 producers, Sarah, Dave, and myself, also is Stephanie Jenkins, who really was just directed an archival effort, but so did Tim McClear and a couple of other people. That's it. And we have 4 editors and assistants and apprentices, and it's a kind of a handmade film. But you're absolutely right. It is not architecture. It is subtraction, and that's, as you guys know. You go out and you record a press conference or you have an interview, and you don't print that. You distill it, and that's the job that we're doing. We're also having to triangulate over time. You're in mostly the journalism business, which is, as was said, the first rough draft of history. We're in the business of having to, triangulate with a number of different sources and witnesses and try to benefit from the help of scholars and others who've investigated this thing, and just whatever you can learn through the passage of time. Things change. Your view of Muhammad Ali as he first refuses induction is a very different one than the one we had exactly 25 years ago this Monday when he lights the torch in Atlanta. And in fact, we've been doing a series of conversations leading up to the partnering PBS with Undefeated, and we're going to have a conversation on Monday night at 7 o'clock Eastern. If you go to pbs.org/Ali events, you can register. We hope you join us, because it's going to be Janet Evans and Todd Boyd from USC, myself and Janae O'Neill from The Undefeated, and just talk about him on the world stage, because what he did in terms of religion, what he did in terms of race, what he did in terms of his achievements. When he's just a kid, he's barely had boxing gloves on, I'm the greatest. It's an empowering thing for him, but it's an empowering thing for people everywhere. It's sort of Jesse Jackson's I Am Somebody magnified 1 billion times.
One of the things I was fascinated by was his brilliance. I mean, to be able to memorize some of the poetry that he recited, and to understand some of the complex issues and distill that in some of the things he said was something I didn't remember.
Yeah, I think we tend to, as we do in everything, because there's a tsunami of information breaking over our heads all the time, and it's only getting worse. And so we tend to resort to kind of conventional, superficial understandings, tying things up in nice bows. And nobody you can tie up in nice bows. You can't tie Abraham Lincoln or Louis Armstrong or Jackie Robinson up into a nice little bow, and certainly not Muhammad Ali. He is one of the most intelligent and thoughtful people with barely a primary education. He is sui generis. He has a great gift, and you can see it in lots of different places. You can see it when he loses to Frazier in their first fight. And, he's been ragging on Frazier. It's not a pretty moment. It's an amazing fight, but it's clearly one that Frazier wanted more than he did. And at the end, though, he's speaking as if he is responsible for accounting not for his own loss in some embarrassment versus his predictions and his braggadocio. He's talking to everyone on earth who's experienced loss and saying, you've got to show and set an example for this. When he wins unanimously on a technicality, his Supreme Court case, technicality because they don't want to set a precedent, he's asked about this victory, and he says, well, it's for the moment it's okay, but there are other people, and he's anticipating Rodney King and George Floyd and so many others for whom justice is not yet going to be served, and in their cases ever served. And so I just think it's he's just remarkable in so many different ways, and he also grows out of a lot of these unattractive aspects. He begins to understand. As he said it, you remember, Dave, he believed in this tallying angel, the biographer Jonathan Igue said, where that there was measuring up the good things and the bad things that you'd done. And if the bad outweighed the good, you were going to hell. And he had a vivid, Igue said, a sort of sense of what hell was. And so he understood late in life, that he had abandoned Malcolm X, and he regretted it and said it publicly, going towards Elijah Muhammad, a less than sterling character, where Malcolm X was really evolving into the kind of Islam that Muhammad Ali would actually practice, that was big-hearted and generous and inclusive and not separated as the Nation of Islam was. That he had, been unfair to Joe Frazier, and unfortunately the damage was done. Frazier was not going to do that, and that he had sort of, as he said, fit my religion to my interests, and that he had cheated on his wives and had not been the best of husbands or even fathers and a father. And it's remarkable that he was able to, in the later years, kind of, even as he was being encased and imprisoned by this, this most beautiful of athletes and this most, loquacious of human beings, imprisoned by this cruel disease, he nonetheless was making himself better. And, his daughter Rashida says that towards the end of the film that boxing was just this much, and to me, just the profession. Some people are carpenters, some people are boxers. And it's sort of what you do with the rest of the material that matters. And so I think what you're talking about, Dave, is all that rest of the stuff, which we were very curious about, begins to help, I think, flesh out the portrait.
You've mentioned already several of the people who were interviewed for the documentary. Jonathan Igue, who wrote the biography, Todd Boyd, who had a very large voice in the film. How do you go about selecting who the people are that you want to talk to, and then how many end up making the final cut?
Most people end up in the final cut. And I did my first on-camera interview when I was in my first year of college in January of '72. So we're coming up on 50 years pretty soon. I was terrified then. I'm terrified now. I just did an interview a couple days ago. And I was sweating bullets. It's still the one place where I feel like a student. So if somebody doesn't make it in, it's all my fault. If they're in, it's all their fault. That's because of whatever it is. You do a lot of reading first. You talk to people. You call them up. Some people are really great, helpful background folks, but they're not going to be great on camera. They know it usually. We can sort of sense it, but we've done interviews where we've gone, boy, that was the greatest interview, and barely been able to use anything. And another time when you thought, well, that was a B+, who turns out to be someone central. You just have to wait till you get that material back and put it in the context of the narrative that's constantly developing. We never stop researching. We never stop writing. There's not a set period and then we write something and then it's written in stone and it informs the shooting and the editing. It's not about that. So, we are so fortunate in the case of this film, and I really want to particularly single out some people besides the ones you'd mentioned. Dave Kindred is one of the great gifts, as you all know, to humankind, not just to sports writing. And his interior understanding of Ali is so generous. Jerry Eisenberg has never forgotten a moment and never forgotten a column he's written about it. And so what you're doing is you're accessing not only this extraordinary sports writer, but all of the things he said. So he can take that third Frazier fight and just turn it into poetry in the way Shirley Povich could about baseball. And I got to know and interview Shirley before he passed away for our baseball series, and was really great. Robert Lipsyte, who was kind of there at the beginning, part of the young guard, the people who weren't offended by his braggadocio the way others were, and were curious about what made him tick, and came back again and again to that well of Muhammad Ali, realizing it wasn't just good story, you were going to get good stuff of course you always did. Even his detractors like Dick Young had to admit that, this was like good copy. But they came back because they were really drawn to the arc of this young man's life, his extraordinary talent, but also the choices he was making. Some that didn't seem so intelligent, some that were extraordinarily brave, and that's why he endures. And Dave Goren, other people really helped kind of corral the film. And I really can't think of, we interviewed that person, but they didn't really work. We interviewed a couple of daughters, Hannah and Rashida. As I mentioned, two of the wives, wife number 2 and wife number 3, that's Belinda, Kalila, and Veronica. We interviewed, Wole Soyinka, the Nobel Prize-winning poet who wrote this, as you probably all know, incredible poem about Muhammad Ali, and other folks that helped, hangers-on, people, his brother, people who would do that. And we also collect archival interviews that permit us to flesh out some of the folks that aren't with us or unable to give us interviews. So, that's the job. That's why it takes 6 years. That's why we're with PBS, because, only PBS would you, be able to spend the time necessary to do the deep dive. And then also what we're doing now, and Monday's conversation, with the Undefeated. It's just not going to happen in other kind of contexts.
So you sit there and you're conducting the interview, or somebody is. Do you hear that soundbite? As some of us come from the TV background, or does it take time while you're transcribing the bane of everyone's existence?
God, you're so smart. I can't speak for Sarah or Dave, who also did the interviews, and I think they've learned a little bit from me. They're excellent interviewers, so I'm sure they've forgotten a lot of the stuff that they might have observed. I have this thing where I'm in the middle of it, and yes, you're constantly trying to find story, right? I mean, what is story but essentially edited human experience? So you can be in the middle of the interview and you're opening up the brackets and you're closing them, or then it gets reopened. But it's funny, by the time the interview's done, I'm sort of so overwhelmed with that thought process and with keeping them on track that I kind of said, well, what, I can remember 2 or 3 really good things. So wait for the transcript, and then we sync up the footage, and we then do the selects. And we really take a dump truck and dump everything that's even possibly usable into the script, and then pick and choose from all the different people who are commenting on that. And even then we go into unselected parts. Michael Bent, for example, the former heavyweight champion, is one of the great forces in the film. He lives, with the exception of one moment when he heard that Muhammad Ali had died, he lives within the fights, and only within the fights. Everybody else, sometimes they're in. Jerry, Dave Kindred, they're in and out. Mostly they're commenting. Todd Boyd, Gerald Early, others are making comments about that. Jesse Jackson, a lot of different people. And but Michael exists within it. And I'd say 1/3 of his material, as I was looking at the script the other day, is unselected, meaning, well, did he say something that we didn't pick? And you then go back up, and sure enough, and it just shows you the fallibility of every single process, and the need, we would argue, and the reason why we're with PBS, for spending the time to do the deep dive, so that it isn't just the first rough draft of history. No slight to any of you who have the impossible task of distilling stuff, not even overnight anymore, but for now. You're writing your piece before the first inning is out, and you have no idea that, it ain't over till it's over, but you're still having to try to anticipate narrative, which is, I'm in awe of that skill still.
You mentioned the J word a little earlier, journalism. I come from a local TV sports background where, even as the sports guy in the newsroom, in the so-called candy store, I would shake my head at some of the news reporting, that it seemed to be too much like they're trying to make it a Hollywood script. How do you avoid that? Because your job as a documentary filmmaker is to tell the whole story.
Yeah, that is a wonderful question, and at the center of it. So if storytelling, as we hopefully established earlier, is editing human experience, when somebody says, "Honey, how was your day?" You don't say, "I back slowly down the driveway, avoiding the garbage can at the curb," unless somebody T-bones you, and then, of course, that's exactly the way you tell it. You kind of edit human experience. So there are laws of storytelling. We're all in the thrall of that. You could say that Aristotle's essay on poetics is about as good as it gets, beginning, middle, and end, climax, characters, antagonists, protagonists, character development, all denouement, all of those sorts of things come from, a big fancy $2 word, Aristotelian poetics. And the laws of storytelling are true for nonfiction as well as fiction. So, and I've had this discussion with Steven Spielberg. I interviewed him, and we just basically realized we were doing the same thing. The only difference was he could make stuff up, I couldn't, right? And that's what it is. So you have another judge on your shoulder, not just the judge of does this work, but is it true? And have I overemphasized it? Or have I de-emphasized something that I shouldn't be doing? And that's why we want to take a lot of time and cover and then recover as much ground as possible to make sure that story. I'll let you in on something. The opening of the film, and I don't know how many of you have seen it, the opening of the film is an intimate and personal thing. It's a family thing when you're dealing with the most famous athlete on earth, right? That used to be halfway through, two-thirds of the way through, I now don't remember it, through episode 3 of 4. And I moved that back to the beginning because I just felt that we go in with a certain amount of presupposition about who he is, and I just wanted to scramble that, if just for a second. So he has an intimate moment with a daughter in a diner, right? And all that does is just sort of saying, maybe this is not, you don't hear Howard Cosell's voice, right? You don't hear his voice for a while. And you don't hear anything else. You see him interacting with his daughter, his voice, but not in the way we think. And then you hear a daughter grown up talking about who he was and what it must have been like. And she's talking about the vibrations of people yelling in her chest, in his chest, and her feeling this as a little girl, he's holding her walking through an airport. And that's a totally another way to come in. It's like, you've gone into the hotel and you come through the revolving doors and the guy greets you and takes your bag. Or do you come in the service entrance and you walk through the kitchen, right? And we want to just say, look, we'll get to the same place, but let's just see it from a different angle.
You talked about, the holy trinity of storytelling, beginning, middle, end. When you're coming to the end, I think Wright Thompson, the great writer for ESPN.com, he called it a hammer. You want to bring the hammer at the end. You use the poem by Wole Soyinka, where he ends, "Enchantment is over, but the spell remains." That's just, hairs on my arm are standing up now as I say it.
And let's just remember that the sentence before Wole finishes the poem, the 4th episode opens with the poem, and then he completes the poem as the brackets of the 4th episode. The last is the word from Bob Dylan that he is the most excellent of men, and then Wole, and then you hear a Bob Dylan song, "I Shall Be Released," after you've just suffered his death, sung by Nina Simone, right? And it's just, you talk about hammer, it's all of those. It's Wole, it's the quoting of Bob Dylan, and then a Bob Dylan song, but sung by the appropriate person to do it,
How long did it take for you to come up with the hammer?
Years, and we never call it that. It's just you feel something, and there is a kind of, you know what it's like when a film has too many endings, and so you always have too many endings when you're working on it initially, when you've thrown in the kitchen sink or backed the dump truck up and put everything in, And so you're beginning to feel what works, and something gets pulled out. And I think it was my idea to say, let's divide Wole between the beginning and the end, and then how we use it, how we open him up. This is, Dave, this is as important. We control, unlike the printed word, right, or a presentation, we control how long it. As soon as we cut off Wole, we can open up between his phrases, so that you can receive the image that's accompanying that. And that you begin to make your own music, if you will. If each shot, each moment, each word is a note, you get to arrange it in a certain way. You have your own particular kind of orchestration, and that's what takes years. People go, people say, why don't you just go, you're always raising money, why don't you leave PBS? Vietnam, took $30 million in 10 and a half years to make, and you were raising money the whole time, and you look like a congressman. And I said, I could go to a streaming service or to a premium cable, and with my track record, get that money like that. I want to do Vietnam. They'd go, sure, here it is. The biggest deal is they wouldn't give me 10 and a half years. That's the thing. They'd give me 2.5 years, and I couldn't do it then. And I need, maybe it's because I'm slow, but I need to have that time to be able to figure out, I'd never heard that expression, hammer, but to understand where that punctuation mark is, where that note is that has the period next to it, which means sustain. And that Wole, let us leave.
You threw it right into the transition I want to make. And if anybody wants to ask a question, please put it in chat. I could ask 40,000 questions, but not all about me. Although my wife might tell you differently. Now my train of thought derailed.
We were talking about the hammer and Wole being an exclamation point.
It was more actually on the PBS and fundraising side. When you're taking this kind of time to have the creative process going on and still have to do that fundraising, how do you look at that? I mean, how do you see the fundraising part of your job?
It's okay. I'm here to complain, I suppose, and I can give you all the horror stories. It's too much. It's like a congressman with the tin can out all the time. But it's part of it. It's part of the payment, that you have to go through. I think it makes us honest. It's just like I notice a lot of my colleagues are very resentful of getting money from organizations that require them to have scholarly advisors, and so they come in as window dressing, and they rarely. We consult with them all the time. They're smart people. Let's hear from them. And so we're constantly want to hear what people say. It doesn't mean that we're pushovers. It doesn't mean that you take every bit of advice, but you want to be exposed to as much things. And part of the reason why it's harder is because too often there is a set research period, 3 weeks, 3 months. There is a set writing period, 3 weeks, 3 months. And then you've got a script that is now written in stone and informs the shooting and the editing, boom, done. So there isn't really the latitude to be able to do that. I've got a neon sign in cursive and lowercase in my editing room, and it says, it's complicated. Like every filmmaker, when your scene is working, you don't want to touch it. But I've been trying to teach myself, and I hope others, that it's okay to destabilize something if it's true and if it's better and it's more complicated. So this is what we're looking for, that undertow. Nobody is ever one thing or the other thing. They're often this very interesting mixture of both. So here's one of the great figures of liberation, Muhammad Ali, still to this day inspiring people, right? And he's using the Jim Crow language against Joe Frazier. So, you can pick it and go, oh, that makes him cancelable, or that makes it, I'm ignoring that. No, you don't ignore it. You put it all in. We all live, with people who are, the people closest to us remain inscrutable and contradictory to the end, and therefore we must as well to them. And this is what we're obligated to do, is take it all together. In fact, one of the biggest gifts I've ever gotten was interviewing Tom Boswell for my update of baseball called the 10th Inning. So it must have been 2008 that we interviewed him. And we're trying to come to terms with, we did it to get my beloved Red Sox a world championship after 86 years. We did it to talk about the dynasties of Atlanta and New York in the 90s. We did it about the strike that interrupted the season that we were coming out in and made us the only baseball in the fall of 94. We did it because of the money. We did it because of steroids. And so we're trying to come to terms with a lot of that stuff, particularly Barry Bonds and steroids. And Boswell said this great thing. He said, the poet John Keats wrote a letter about William Shakespeare, saying that Shakespeare had what Keats called negative capability, that the moralist in all of us wants to decide good or bad. But Shakespeare was able to keep in tension these oppositions. And I realized as Tom was saying that to me, that was what I had been trying to do in my work. I just didn't have a phrase or a way to articulate it very well. And so what you want to do is, yes, hold off. And it makes us, it makes it less tidy. Nothing is then tied into the bow, as I said, but it makes it so much more interesting. And what's been great is that the feedback from sports writers and historians as well as family members was, I never saw that. I never knew that. That piece of footage is new to me. I hadn't thought about it that way. I can't believe, how did you juggle all of the stuff? The Nation of Islam, the politics, the race, the women, all the entourage, the friends, the faith, the actual dynamics of the fight. We were unwilling to let any of the aspects go. We were going to be as good within the fights as we were talking about the Nation of Islam and vice versa. Like you were going to know about, W.D. Farad or Elijah Muhammad, Elijah Poole, as he was born, and how he refused the draft and went to jail in World War II. So he's got a mentor who he's emulating and is helping to give him the little bit of the backbone. That helps us understand something. It puts it in a kind of interesting context, because the Nation of Islam also murdered Malcolm X. They're separatists. There's an interview with Bud Collins in which Muhammad Ali is lauding George Wallace, and Collins is like, what? And we're going, what? But that you want to put that in there, because he said, you don't want to move into some neighborhood where somebody doesn't want you. And so he's upending your own sense of what the version of civil rights is that we're supposed to be subscribing to. And so it's great. Anything that just makes it more fluid and more complicated to me is worth it, because that's the true mirror. If our narrative is edited experience, then if we're superimposing some already arrived at end, we've already failed. But if we can somehow tolerate and contain all of this negative capability, then we might be tilting towards some sort of success. I believe that all biography is failure, because the person closest to us is a mystery. And so we're going to go back 150 years and tell you who Abraham Lincoln was, or Louis Armstrong or Jackie Robinson or Muhammad Ali.
You tell the whole
But we're obligated to try. That's all.
You tell the whole story, the black, the white, the gray, and if I might quote you from that 60 Minutes piece, and race and race and race is who we are.
Yeah. Look, we know when we were born, right? July 4th, 1776. We know where, Philadelphia, and we know why, most importantly, which is the second sentence of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The guy who wrote that owned hundreds of people in his lifetime. Didn't see the contradiction, really. Didn't see the hypocrisy. And more importantly, didn't see fit to free any of those people. And so, I've been saying this, we've been struggling for the last 18 months with the virus. We got a 402-year-old virus since 1619 that's operating. And it does shake up a lot of stuff. And I've been beset by friends and critics and scholars who've said, enough about race. Why is it central? And it's just central. How could it not be? And it's there. You don't necessarily go looking for it, but it's always there. If you do any deep dive into American history, you can't help but run up against contradictions. And these are not always negative outcomes, right? I mean, the only art form that is recognized around the world that Americans created is jazz. created in an African American community in which improvising is really necessary. Because if you're unfree in a free land, let me tell you, that is different. And you have to learn how to improvise a lot more than, what we do in business or what we do in baseball or what we do in chess or what we do in journalism or documentary filmmaking. And so it's just there. It's just there, and we have to deal with it. And the terrifying thing, as sports writers, this, the best thing is to see a coach on Friday night in Texas go, we stunk. We failed in every, we didn't on defense and special teams, offense, we just didn't do it, we stunk, And if you did a halfway go, you barely squeaked by, he goes, we won, but, we got a lot of room for an improvement. Or Saturday afternoon after the college game, same thing. But now Texas wants to tell you that you cannot talk about the fact that you failed on special teams, or you failed in defense, or you failed in offense. And I'm offended by that.
As I said, I could go on and ask questions forever, but I want to give our people here on the call a chance. Kai Dambach, who is in Germany. My girlfriend was born and raised in a country that did not have baseball. How should I explain the game and what makes it great to her?
Well, to me, it's the thing that I had to do. My dad was an anthropologist. I spent the first year of my life, don't remember a thing, in the highest village in Europe, in the Alps, in the French Alps. He was trying to explain baseball, could not do it. And he described to me later on in his life, and I was saying, Dad, you had to tell him that one team is in the dugout. They didn't understand that there was a team waiting off camera while the other team was out. So as I was approaching my baseball film, I just tried to go back to the elements. No clock. The defense has the ball. The defense has the ball. And it's the person who scores, not the puck, not the ball, not the pigskin, right? It's the person. And so what you get is a kind of dynamic. And I think once I've been fairly successful in explaining it to other folks. And when they do that and they can get into the idea of the situational stuff that starts with what kind of pitch is made, what kind of interpretation of what kind of pitch is made by the batter and how that bat is swung. And then the fielder has to judge, whether it's the physics of a fly ball or whatever it might be, and all the muscle memory that goes into it. The notion that this is a boring game is just kind of like, huh? Yeah. I'm happy also to talk to German wives to see if I can help it. I did have for a while a German girlfriend where I worked pretty hard, and I think I did okay. So
Explaining baseball all the time.
Explaining baseball, yeah.
I'm happy to sit with you in the bleachers at Fenway, by the way, since I
Name the time.
grew up a Red Sox fan.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Brooklyn, but never lived there because I'm in France, right? I then grew up in Baltimore, Newark, Delaware. My dad taught anthropology, so Orioles was it. And then I moved to Ann Arbor when I was 10, and so the Tigers got my only World Series championship to that point there in '68, and then fell out of it for countercultural reasons. The Mets to me was a human interest story, not a baseball story. And then I lost 70 and 71 completely. But when I went to college at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, my teacher's husband had a new Sony Trinitron, and he said, "Gotta look at this thing. It's really great." And I'd never seen color TV this great. And what was on was a baseball game, and I went, "Oh yeah, I love this game." And who was there? But it was Carlton Fisk and Jim Rice and Dewey Evans and Fred Lynn, and it was like, okay, you got me at hello. So that was 71, 72, and I've been a Red Sox fan ever since. Sorry.
Okay. No worries. That's I'm there with you, lifelong though. Bijan Todd wants to know, has there been any one interview that has stuck the most with you that you'll never forget?
I think there have been a handful of them, and for different reasons. Rachel Robinson, the first interview I did with her, I did a second one for our standalone on Jackie, but the first one I've never in my life broken down and cried in the middle of an interview, but she told me after he died she could not go on. And so she carried that picture of him stealing home. Yogi always, and I had an ongoing fight that Yogi said he was out. I said he was safe. You know, the famous picture of him sliding apparently under Yogi's tag. I mean, Yogi would just come up to me from half a mile away and yell, "Out!" And so I go, "What was that?" And Ernie Banks said, "Oh, he thinks that Jackie was out." And I go, "Safe." And that went on for the rest of Yogi's life. And she went from room to room, just taking the portrait with him. And I just wept. I had to say stop to the cameraman. I've never done that. Shelby Foote, obviously, in the Civil War. You know, I came in with big, long high school questions, you know, 3 or 4 lines, you know, making a speech. And within a half an hour, I was just going, Grant, you know, and then he would just give you something about Grant. Wynton Marsalis, who, like Tom Boswell, said in jazz to me, and we've become, you know, as good of like a brother, as he says, from another mother. He said, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. That's helped me as much as Boswell's negative capability that Keats had attributed to Shakespeare. You know, lots of them. I remember I interviewed the late Paul Fussell for our World War II film, and he, I think, went in with a kind of arrogant sense that he was going to be the next Shelby Foote, nervous as hell, his lips smacking because his nervousness had dried up his saliva. And first 3 roles were like just terrible. Still shooting film, and so it was like, we're wasting a lot of money here. And he kept talking about toward the end of the 3rd reel, the kids that were sent as replacements on the line. This is at a time where if you're a 2nd lieutenant, as he was, on the line in France in combat, as he was, your life expectancy was 17 days. Either you were killed, you were severely wounded, or you went insane. And he was a little bit of the last 2. Not insane, but it was really tough for him. So I said to him, where we're changing reels to the 4th, not even sure we should go on, but kind of embarrassed that I hadn't really gotten anything out of this great historian who I said, so these kids, you know, how old are they? And he goes, 17, 18. And I said, and how old are you? He said, 19. And I looked at him and I said, you saw bad stuff. And his cheeks started to quiver and his lips started to go. And the next 2 reels are about as priceless. I mean, he described scenes we couldn't even put in the film. They were so graphic, of brains coming out. One is in the film of him coming upon it was a full moon, and he was on some patrol, and he came upon this vignette, this painting, and what had happened is one of our fragmentation bombs had exploded and killed everybody in this little setting. You know, 12 Germans. And there was the medic still holding the scissors and the bandage in one hand, reaching out for the wounded guy, because it's so flippin' freezing cold. There's no blood flowing. Everything's frozen. It's just a tableau of what it was. And I mean, by the time the interview was over, my heart was pounding out of my chest. And we had I think we spent 2 of those stories because they were just so concentrated, you know? It was like, you know, whiskey and not like watered down beer. It was like just amazing. So those stick out in my mind, but there've been, I mean, I've done hundreds, and as I suggested, I still feel like a student.
Our board chair, Diane Blixt, wants to know, from all your research and what you now know about Muhammad Ali, what do you think he would consider the most important moments of his life?
Oh, what a wonderful question, Diane. I think, like his daughter Rashida, of the 2 daughters that we interviewed, of anybody that we interviewed, that was related to him, she seemed to have gotten that little bit of his heart, of his capacious heart. And when she said boxing was just this much, I think he would have downplayed the boxing. Like, frankly, our series, you know, it covers all this stuff, but you could say that the mile markers are, you know, the Olympics, the first listed fight, this fight, that fight, this masterpiece against Cleveland Big Cat Williams, which, you know, Michael Bank calls his Picasso, his Baryshnikov, his Miles Davis. You know, the Terrell fight, what's my name? What's my name? First, second, third, Frazier. Obviously, the Rumble in the Jungle. You know, the excruciating bits of the later fights where he shouldn't have been out there and Parkinson's already had its hold. But I think he'd be talking about some interior things about his faith and about love. You know, there's a moment, you know, when the Beatles have just hit the United States and they visit the Fifth Street Gym in Miami, and I just look at him and he sort of fake punches them and they look like they're all four going down, kind of like a set of dominoes. And I'm just looking at John Lennon and I'm looking at Muhammad Ali and I'm going, oh yeah, they get it. These are the two people who understood. There's only one, you know, it's the four-letter word that the FCC is totally okay with, but the rest of us really shrink from. So they understood it. It's all you need. And Muhammad Ali had that. So I think it's a spiritual thing. And I'm that's a cop-out in a way, because that means everything to everybody in a different way, shape, or form. But there is a dimension to this person who is irresistible in that way. I met him once, and I never spoke a word to him, and he never spoke a word to me. We had a wordless conversation across a coffee shop in L.A. And it was, I mean, it still stands as one of those. I mean, I was basically telling him, I know who you are. And he goes, yep. And I'm not going to bother you. And he's basically saying, it's okay. And I said, it's still, and we just, no lips moved. And he was 20 feet away. And yet I heard his voice, and maybe he heard mine. I don't know. It was great. That's who he is. That's who he is, you know, and that's why, you know, Lincoln, if people would say, you know, who do you take out to dinner? And it would be Lincoln, it would be Louis Armstrong, it would be Muhammad Ali, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you know, maybe Harriet Tubman or Ida B. Wells. I mean, these are just uber Americans, mythic in their stature and understanding of the U.S. and us, you know, the big letters and the lowercase plural pronoun.
Chuck Bailey wants to know, how did you decide to attempt to deal with Ali's immediate sense of self and weave that through the ups and downs of his wild popularity swings?
So, you know, the best thing about that's a good question, is that we didn't really have to do anything. That may have been the easiest part. There is so much stuff on him, so much stuff. He is so valuable that he's the writer of the film. Sarah and Dave wrote this beautiful script, and I hopefully tinkered with it and made it better. But, you know, he's there all the time. He's talking all the time. And it's so pronounced at the end when he cannot talk that the silence is in itself a kind of power. There's a vacuum created by it. So I think all of that is just watching the disparate versions of himself, the certainty, the humor, the braggadocio, the poetry, all of that, the thoughtfulness, the intelligence, his media savvy. You know, I mean, even when he's just on fire because he's been reclassified 1A and Robert Lipside and other journalists are down in Miami, and somebody says, you know, does that mean you're going to refuse the draft? He goes, well, I don't know about that. Meaning he has to think about it, and he has to, you know, he's avoiding some traps, and he's also walking into them. You know, he later the next day said, them Viet Congs never did anything against me, you know. Mm-hmm. And that's where, you know, Daley pulls his license and he can't fight Terrell in Chicago, and the whole thing starts unraveling for him, and he's out for a while.
Nick Zarula wants to know if you work with the same producers, or does your team adapt depending on subject and project?
So I'm a producer on every one of my films, and I usually have a co-producer. I have 4 different what I'll call producing teams, and that's why we're able to sort of overlap, and each of those teams we're working on 2 films at once. But you know, we're constantly refreshed by new people coming up. But I've worked with my cinematographer for 49 years. I've worked with Jeffrey Ward, the principal collaborator in writing, for almost 40 years. It's 39 years. I've worked with Lynn Novick, co-producer and co-director on some of the films since '89. I've worked before that with Dayton Duncan, the other principal writer. There's some people who've been around for decades, and then others that are new. One of the editors we'd sort of brought up in our ranks of the 4 episodes, Ted Raviv, I'd worked with Algernon, the editor of episode 4, once before in the Jackie Robinson film several years ago. And then editors of 1 and 2 are new to us. 3 out of 4 are African American, which was hugely important for us, as most of the staff was, to get it right and to not miss the signals that are sometimes even the best of intentions can miss. Sometimes those best of intentions are fraudulent at their base. So we've been, and then advised by people like Todd and Jerry and Howard Bryant, who, helped us make the film whole, as he wanted to talk about Ali becoming whole in Kinshasa.
Tom Shanahan says, I wrote a book, Ray of Light, on Michigan State coach Duffy Doherty's Underground Railroad teams in the 1960s, leading college football integration. The frustration with continuing to tell that story as much of the reality has been overshadowed by myths and fiction around Bear Bryant and the 1970 game that ties into a bow. What's your advice? Just keep plowing ahead. I have a
just keep plowing ahead. This is not the same thing, but it's kind of the Larry Doby problem. It's really hard once it's happened to then try to refocus attention on these things. But this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because, as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it. And even, when Obama was elected, a lot of people, friends and scholars and critics, would just say, now will you shut up? And I held up the Onion magazine, newspaper, for January 20th, 2009, the day he was inaugurated. And it said, black man given worst job in nation. And I just said, just watch what happens. Just watch what happens. And, almost to a person, those biggest, most vociferous critics, both friends and colleagues and critics and scholars, have come back just to sincerely apologize, going, you're right, and look at us now. I mean, it's just a mess. And, stuff, the Supreme Court undoing Voting Rights Act. I mean, it's just... This is the most fraught. I think this is the most dangerous period. I mean, the 3 great crises before the Civil War, the Depression, and World War II were great. This is the biggest threat to our existence, existential threat to our existence.
Steve Moulton, I'm interested in the art of the interview. How much going into an interview do you have set, and how much is reacting to the answer from your questions?
Yeah, that's really good. I think one of the problems is, as you got your set of questions, you do your research, you got to do your homework, you got those questions, but you also want to be nimble. That question 7, as you ask it, shouldn't be going, okay, now I got to get ready for 8, because there may be a 7A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and you got to be able to sort of recognize the tells of when that rabbit hole emerges, and you got to go down it. And sometimes it's a cul-de-sac, and sometimes it's fruitful. But as you know, the art of interview is the art of listening, and that's an incredibly difficult thing to do, particularly when you've got a time span of maybe 2 hours, or an attention span of maybe 2 hours till someone's tired. What are you going to get out of it? How are you going to do it? You just got to do something. Really. You just got to listen, and I'm exhausted. It's after an interview. It's exhausting, particularly because if you don't just have a tape recorder, or you're scribbling stuff down, or both, you've got a cameraman who costs X amount, $2,000 a day, and his equipment, and the sound man, and the assistant sound man, and the travel to the place, and the producers who are coming too. You just sort of feel like there's this, unbelievable money mouth that's swallowing things up. And you have to have a kind of patience, like you're there and we're going to figure this out, and tact left and right to figure out how to bring something out. My questions are never in it, right? And we're trying to make them camera ready. So if I say, do you like chocolate ice cream? And they go, yes, that's a dead question. But if you say, I love chocolate ice cream, in fact, when I was 10, that's where you hope. So you're trying to figure out how to ask a question that doesn't get a nope or a yes or sure. And there's no understanding what the sure was.
That kind of dovetails in the 2-minute warning. So this will be the last question. Van Tate is going to tell us a story. I don't know if you have to go do something else, but after we finish with it, Van has a story about meeting Muhammad Ali. If everybody else wants to stick around. And then we want to promote the documentary and Monday night as well. When you aspire to an unvarnished profile of a beloved historic figure, particularly one as recent as Ali, do you find sources hesitant to cooperate?
There are two main sources of hesitation. One is financial, right? That is to say, I've got the goods, I'm planning to write the book, to make the film, do this, how much will you pay me? And the other one is intimate and personal. I'm not ready to talk. I'm maybe worried, nobody expresses this, I may be worried about how I'll come out. We try to let people know, let our past work speak for itself, that it will be complicated and fair. And we rarely have somebody saying, no. Sometimes people punt until it's too late, and you understand that's what was necessary for them. But no, it's just, besides the distraction of mammon and money and stuff like that, which is just sort of disappointing. It's mainly just kind of personal stuff. Not that we're revealing bad things, but they're just maybe not able to feel like they could talk about, in this case, their dad or their husband or whatever it might be. And that's okay. We get it.
What's next, Ken? I know you told 60 Minutes last year you're working on 7 documentaries at that time.
Yeah, I think it's up to 8 right now. Forgive me if I miss one. The next film will be on Benjamin Franklin, and the next is on the U.S. and the Holocaust. We're working on a history of the buffalo. We're doing our first non-American topic on Leonardo da Vinci. We're doing a history of the American Revolution in time, we hope, for the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord in the spring of 2025. We're doing a history of LBJ and the Great Society. We're doing a film called Emancipation to Exodus about African-American life after emancipation and into the Great Migration North and Reconstruction and all of that stuff. And a biography of the buffalo. Really not about the buffalo, but about the people who used the buffalo and the people who brought the buffalo to the brink of extinction, and the same people who brought it back from the brink of extinction. So there's the hands are full, and a few other projects that we're just sort of noodling around and trying to figure out if they're going to get traction or actually we've never had a knot, but trying to find traction on some stuff. You guys and everybody else, understandably, it's about when we say it's done and you get it and it's got a title. But for us, it's the process. I'll work on another film or 2 or 3 today. And that's, par for my course. And all I want to do is put my head on the pillow and feel like I've made a film better.
I just shared pbs.org/Ali for Monday night, correct?
Ali /Ali events. And so Monday night, as I was saying, that we're going to have Janet Evans and Todd Boyd and Lene O'Neill and me talking about Ali on the world stage and sort of trying to come to terms with, this most known and most beloved person on the planet in the context of the 25th anniversary to the day of his lighting the torch in Atlanta, 7 o'clock Eastern, please come and register. I think it'll be a pretty interesting conversation.
And I just shared the link for the 4 episodes. Go to that page, and the episodes are down at the bottom of the page, and it'll be time well spent. Ken Burns, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. All the best wishes and success, and
It's
let me
been
know
my
when you
pleasure.
want to do Red Sox, I'll fly up.
Yeah, no, it'll be fun. I haven't seen a game this year or last year, so I've got a pent up excitement to go to the old park and watch them play.
It's been 4 years for me, but thank you very much. And
thanks everybody. I appreciate your patience, and look forward to seeing you Monday night, and then in September if you don't get a chance to watch it before that.
Thanks, Ken.